everyone for joining us today. We've got some fun topics to get through today with regards to annual giving in the year ahead. Just some of them here in terms of crowdfunding, research, phone and mail, so a little bit on giving days, some stewardship items, and then some just kind of quick things for you to consider for your program. Now, in fairness, we've got 60 minutes for this, and I'm very sensitive of your time because I know, having sat in on webinars in the past, and most of you probably have something scheduled for right after this. So I'll be conscious of that and try not to go over on time. So there may be topics, for instance, like giving days, that I'm going to show you some good examples of, but not dig into too much. But know that any of these topics, I'm more than happy to spend time speaking with you about if there's anything you want more detail on than I do provide today. So digging right in, crowdfunding. It's clearly one of the most talked about topics in annual giving for nonprofits across all sectors right now, be it health or the arts or education, whatever it may be. A lot of people are curious about it, and a lot of our leaders are interested. It is, in many ways, the current shiny new toy. So that being said, of course, what is it? If you're not familiar with it, it's basically, having a project or something specific that you're raising money for, and it's just basic, kind of like, it's almost like passing the hat, but online. So you can get money from a large number of people to fund the program. It allows you to match, a unique cause with an interested, motivated audience. It allows you to apply somewhat of what we do with Major Gift Philosophy to finding a specific prospect's passion, but at the annual giving level. And it lets you illustrate impact in a way that we often don't see within annual giving. It's a little easier to sit down with a major gift prospect and say, with your, X million dollars, we're going to do this, this, and this. Sometimes we'll see appeals, or we'll make appeals where we talk about your $25 will do this, your $100 will do that. But with crowdfunding, you get a little more specific, as you might see the program, that exactly what your money is going to be doing. So who's doing it well? And I'll go through these and talk about a few different topics with them. I'll start with Middlebury, who I believe was registered for this, so I think they're out there listening right now. So kudos to you. As you can, they were one of the. Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Some folks are having trouble hearing, so I'm not sure. Maybe I'm not having trouble, but I've gotten several folks who've sent a message to the question box.
Okay.
Maybe if you're on speakerphone, do pick up the landline.
I will try to switch headsets real quick, everybody. Sorry about the housekeeping. Give me about 5 seconds here. Okay, hopefully that's better. I just switched here so that you can hear me. If not, I'll end up just picking up the headset and going with it that way. Let's see here. Lori, can you just chime in again if people aren't hearing me well, and I'll make sure to pick up the headset then.
Okay.
So as I was saying, Middlebury they were one of the first to tackle crowdfunding. They've got some great success stories on their page. I encourage you to go check it out. Click through some of the different programs. A lot of theirs are in the $2,000 range, which, when you think about it, within annual giving, that's not a level that we often can, point to and say $2,000 is going to make this impact. You're going to do specifically this, and you'll show that impact to the donors. It's something that it's really great in terms of also not knowing where your passions align for your audience. So, for instance,
Devin,
with
I'm sorry.
Yep, nope. Switch
People
over.
still trouble hearing.
Okay, I'm sorry. Give me just a second.
Worries.
Okay, hopefully this is better. Sorry to be messing with audio so much for you guys. All right, so moving on through just what I was going to say is a lot of times, again, to come back to the major gift comparison, we have research on folks. We know where their passion lies. and we will approach them after having conversations with them to give to something specific. With regards to the annual giving and the masses and your prospect base, a lot of times we make assumptions like, they want to give to the specific program they graduated from, or they want to give to the specific wing of the museum because that's where they gave last time. When in reality, they may be moved by something else altogether. And so a program like this allows the donors to find what they're passionate about and fund it. Another great one, and I like this organization a lot. In fact, this campaign had actually before had moved me to become a donor in its own right. It's 100 cameras, and what they did here was, well, just to give you some information on the organization. They're in New York City, and what they do is they put cameras in the hands of, basically those that are poor and in difficult situations around the world. Then they take the photos from those cameras where you get to see the world in their eyes and turn them into products that they can then sell around the globe via, 100 camera auctions, activities, events, etc. And then half the money from those sales go back to the children's communities, and the other half goes to the organization to continue their efforts. They have a very small team, and they spent less than $1,000 on this and raised over $50,000 in 45 days. But one of the key things I want to point out here is that the video was really a key component. If you get a chance, as you'll see here, and then at the end I have all the links combined, but there's a link at the top there to go see this video. And it really, you can't have your video be too long. It's got to make the case for support, and of course, pull on potential donors' emotions. And they did a really nice job with that here. Another example here from the University of California system. You may have heard of this one. It was quite popular and well promoted, and of course it had a bunch of celebrities that took place with various kind of competitions and ways to motivate people to give. We had a lot of donors, a lot of contributions, and clearly $1.3 million raised. And then the last example I'm going to show here is from Cornell.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy.
Point out here is that Cornell is doing it well, but what you need to know is that it's taken a lot of work. And I'm fortunate enough to be.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy.
Problems that crowdfunding isn't simply going to make money fall from the sky for your program, and it's not a silver bullet. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of resources. Lori, I think I'm getting some background noise. All right. Anyway, moving on. Excuse me, I think it sounds like somebody's off mute, and I'm getting feedback.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy.
Fun. Okay, let's see. I hope the feedback's gone. Okay. So after jumping through some of those hoops about technical things of the webinars that I'm not aware of, I'm going to get back to the meat of the presentation. All right. So it takes a lot of time to plan, execute, and create content and market these efforts. What makes me a little wary as we look at this in terms of whether or not you should be considering it is that this is the kind of program where it's exciting to read about and see the success stories. And there are other success stories out there. I know when I looked at the registrations for this, we had the University of Utah signed up and the University of Virginia.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy.
Programs that have wanted to and tried to tackle crowdfunding and head down the road but didn't have the resources for it or hit too many roadblocks internally. So what I want to point out here is, everything on this list that you see on the slide right now, phone, mail, face-to-face, integration of your programs and communications, research and testing, in many ways those are what Michigan State's Vice President Bob Groves likes to call the blocking and tackling of your program, in that and you need to be doing those well. If you are doing all those well and you have what you might call a relatively well-oiled machine, then it may be time to start thinking about crowdfunding and how you can plan and implement these programs. And I'm more than happy to discuss that with you. But I want to make sure that you're not just chasing the latest shiny new toy, and that it's not, and if you have anyone, for instance, be it, the president of your organization or another executive who's like, we have to be on the crowdfunding bandwagon, I'm happy to have a conversation, or you need to have a conversation with them about the resources involved and how, it may develop a nice return on investment, but if you're not doing everything else right yet, it may not be the best place to put your resources. All right, moving on to research. Research is actually one of my favorite topics for annual giving. And let me first and foremost say that the word research in philanthropy and fundraising efforts is almost always in a major gift connotation, and that's just wrong. Well, of course there should be research for major gifts, don't get me wrong with that, but it shouldn't just be for major gifts. With regards to benchmarking, there are lots of programs out there that are benchmarking every year against their peers when it comes to annual giving. And there are things that can be really good about benchmarking. And actually, I think it's very valuable for leaders and major gift programs specifically when you're looking at things like investment and staffing levels and the performance of major gift officers. And it can provide some good information for you there. It can provide also some very unexpected challenges at the annual giving level. It's often not even apples to oranges. It's often like apples to T-bone steaks because of the vast differences in things like definitions of giving levels or the investments in the programs and how you're tackling everything from your program's point of view, because there are so many moving parts in annual giving. And there are, of course, there's always the analogy of spinning plates, et cetera, et cetera. And there's just so much going on in annual giving that when you try to boil it down for benchmarking, it can become really challenging to see, what's working from place to place. Now, let me highlight one specifically, and that's the investments and the budget and resources of a program. When I was at the University of Michigan, I was taking part in an annual benchmarking meeting with peers from across the Big 10 and Big 12, and some of them got really excited about my new donor acquisition numbers. And initially, we're like, okay, what did you do? What script were you using? What language were you using? How can we apply this? And now to highlight the problem here is we were very fortunate there that the provost had put aside $1.5 million of a budget infusion so we could specifically get new donors. So not everybody else had that. And when you benchmark and it's not apples to apples, you can get misguided in the way your program, with what path you head down and what you think is best practice. So what that then brings us to is, maybe instead of benchmarking, should you be considering doing constituent research at the annual giving level? And I think I've kind of tipped my hand, but it's a big yes. But here, just as a slide I like to show with regards to this topic, in that it's for major companies that are very often cited in business school case studies, particularly with the Harvard case studies. And there's one constant across them. No matter what marketing case study it would be, there's always market research. These companies that you see here would never conduct business without researching their customer base and who the consumers potentially are. But nonprofits do it all the time. It's something that, for some reason, historically, marketing has been, not always, but often is considered a dirty word in fundraising or annual giving. And because of that context, we've missed out on some of the marketing 101 practices that we really, really should be conducting within the industry. So why would you do this research? There's some great things that you can identify. And we've had really strong success with programs around the country, in the United States specifically, that in identifying some of these items and doing this kind of research, that we can then, refocus how we communicate with an audience, what the priorities are going to be, things like what are the best messages and a strong case for support. Where do your prospects best affiliate? We often make assumptions on that. As I touched on briefly earlier, like for instance, in the higher ed model, we'll say, well, they graduated from chemistry, so of course we should be asking them for that. And, it's not always the case. What prospects want to support, they're across the country and across nonprofit sectors, we often find that the thing that's being asked for is what's most important to the organization's leadership, and not necessarily most important to the donor. So I'm not saying that everything should be guided by what the donor's interests are, but you need to be listening and not asking for the wrong thing. So for instance, you may have an audience that is very excited about supporting student scholarships for a K through 12 school, but the headmaster wants to ask for a new building that she really wants to have on campus. So that's what the appeal ends up asking for, but folks are really much more interested in supporting students. It's a good area just to learn about what your people are most interested in. How do they want to be engaged? A lot of nonprofits have events that they conduct and programs that they put on that are in many ways because it's the adage of, well, that's what we've always done. And that's not necessarily the best way to tackle these things. Finding out what people want, where they want them, how they want to be involved with your organization can go a long way to planning, how your volunteer programs are going to work, etc. Identifying which perspective prospects want to hear from is a big one. And actually, I'll tie that into the last one of overcoming internal politics. Now, we've got a lot of people on this webinar today and representing a lot of different organizations. And so if you happen to be from the one that doesn't have internal politics, I will note that most places have some that they struggle with. It's often, my opinion versus yours. I think this is a better approach, and my boss may think another approach is better. What I really like about constituent research for this model is it can illustrate, and really take those personal opinions out of the equation, in that instead of spending a lot of time arguing about this and saying this is what we should do, you can instead say, look, this is what the research says. This is what the data have told us. Just as an example, when I've done this with higher ed institutions, one of the questions we ask about is, whose perspective are you most interested in hearing from? And the somewhat difficult conversation of telling a dean or president that his or her name shouldn't be on an appeal letter gets a little easier when you start to see the data come in and it's saying only 5% of people want to hear from the dean and only 6% of people want to hear from the president. Now, what's important with research like this is that you don't take those kinds of things and apply them to everyone just because those are the overall findings. While that's great, and it does help you with the internal politics I was talking about, and it's so that you can show that dean or president, like, okay, this is what the stats say, is that you look at it in various slices and dices. So you can look at it and find out, as we often do, that older, donors who give high levels of, high-level gifts are more interested in hearing from the leadership of an organization, whereas others are not. Many others are more interested in hearing, what from those that are seeing the direct impact of the giving. So if you're interested in this, this is an area I love. I think it's where, the programs that are over the course of the next year and years ahead that are going to make kind of the big leaps and bounds with their program are going to start tackling these kinds of things. More than happy to discuss this at any time. It's really, yeah, I get really excited about this, and I'm excited about the results I've seen with other programs and with clients I've worked with. So, moving on to the phone program. I understand not everyone on here has a phone program, so I'm not going to stay on this too long, but for those of you that do, a few quick thoughts. First of all, don't kill the phone program. Just readjust your expectations. Those that, saw how phone programs were about 15 years ago really got to see what was, I guess I would call the heyday of phone programs. You had the best access to people because people were still primarily using landlines. You had the do not call registry, which got rid of telemarketers but allowed nonprofits to still be on the phone getting a hold of people, and if you had that relationship, you could still call them. And people were answering the phone. The caller ID wasn't as prominent. It was, you could get a hold of people. So that said, we're in a new world now. There are more cell phones. Yes, you can call those, but it's a little trickier. It's more difficult to get a hold of people because they're less likely to answer the phone if they don't have you in their contacts or they don't recognize your number. But that said, it's still one of, if not the very best way, to acquire new donors. Now, obviously, I've shown my hand a little bit on that second bullet point in terms of who you should be calling. In that donor acquisition is a great way to go with your phone program if you have the data and you have the prospects that you can put into your phone program. This isn't to say that donors should be excluded altogether. They should be included at the right time, but I'm going to talk about that in a slide or two. And then hopefully many of you are doing this already, but your phone program also really, it provides a great place to call and thank donors during the day or during different hours that you might not be using it for solicitation. It's a great way to use the resources if you have them, and frankly, it surprises a lot of people. If you can call and leave an answering machine message just saying, hey, wanted to thank you for making that gift of $100. It really helps with X, Y, and Z. It can have a great impact. In fact, one of my clients just did some thank you calls. It was probably about a month or two ago now, and they actually got a letter in the mail from one of their longtime donors who was just so shocked, taken back, and happy about getting that call that it really went a long way with that person. I'm a big fan of not using N of one research, so that I don't want you to take just that one example and say that means all of this is wonderful, but I do think it's a good example of kind of the impact you can have. And then testing is something, if you know me or you've seen me present before, or you're one of my clients, you know that I kind of beat this drum to no end. Testing, like again, going back to the fact that annual giving really is marketing. Testing, it should be a part of everything. You can test your segments, your messaging, your ask levels, and with the phone program, it's a way you can test it in such a way that you get more immediate feedback than you will with your testing via some of the mail or email programs where you may not hear as quickly. So just keep that in mind. It's stewardship and testing are other ways that we can be using the phone program. Now, looking at direct mail, there are a lot of challenges with direct mail right now. We know that the costs are going up. We know delivery is slowing down. Potential that Saturday delivery could be going away altogether. So should you still be using it? And if so, who should you be mailing to? And then how do you integrate? Yes, it's slowing down, and it's getting more expensive. But direct mail and online still show significantly higher average gifts than the phone program, even when you remove for variables like previous giving levels, etc. So in terms of who you should mail, I'm still a fan of sending something to everyone, all your prospects, twice a year. It doesn't have to be something incredibly expensive. I think that, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be a solicitation. Part of it is that I value data so much that, if you're going out twice a year and you're using the relatively inexpensive address service requested service from the post office, that will get you those updated addresses, I think it's really, really valuable to keep track of those that may be moving in your database. And just as a quick tidbit on that, if you're not familiar with it, because I know a lot of people aren't and a lot of programs aren't, that the USPS will give you those addresses updated in an electronic file for much cheaper than they will via, the old yellow stickers. So make sure you're working with your contact at the Postal Service to make sure you're hopefully saving some money there and making it easier for you to import. That being said, and to those that aren't in the U.S., I apologize for that very U.S.-specific example. Let's see. So in terms of who else should be hearing from you via mail, there's no doubt that your leadership, annual giving prospects, and donors should be hearing from you with more of a high-end mail appeal and a high-end approach that are specifically segmented to their interests, their giving behaviors, and any research you've done on those individuals. Clearly, those that have been responsive to mail in the past should be hearing from you via mail because you know it works. And maybe the most important question with this and with regards to the previous slide on the phone program is that you need to be making sure you're integrating things across all channels. Still to this day, there are many places that have their mail program, their phone program, their email program, their social media, their events, their communications. Those calendars are all running somewhat independently, or they're sharing just enough to know they don't always bump heads, but it's not what we would really call integrated. What we need to be doing is overlaying all of those things together and think. So in the quintessential program, you've got all those calendars together. You've got the research you've done, so you know what messages are needed and what messages make people give and motivate giving and what they want to hear and who they want to hear from. And everything that builds up to the ask that's not an ask is touching on those topics properly from the right point of view, so that then the ask is just the combination of everything and it's making them more likely to give. So then you think about, okay, well, what channels would we use then first for those asks? I'm a fan of kind of setting the table with social so that those that are engaged with you via social media are seeing, somewhat of a, hey, the campaign's coming, or don't be surprised if you hear from us soon. Make sure you're supporting X, Y, and Z. And then hitting folks that you have an email address with hitting them with email first. It's if you do it right and you do it well, it's the least expensive approach to them. It's not completely free. Obviously, you've got time and resources that you have to commit to it. But those that you can get via email are more likely to give it a higher level, and you're getting at a lower cost than mail or phone, which then I would then move on to mail and then on to phone. So you can see with regards to how do you integrate, it's getting all of these in the right order for the cost, and then of course, going through this again in terms of emailing after the phone and integrating these channels well. So then moving on to the next topic, I'm looking over at some of the questions right now. We'll keep the questions coming, and I will definitely. What I'll try and do is wrap up by about 1:45 Eastern, and so that's about 14 minutes from now, and then I'll start to go through some of the questions and address them. So keep those questions coming so that I can try and tackle them all, and if I can't answer them all while you're on the webinar today, I'll answer them in some form of a blog post so you can see them all there. So giving days have been quite a buzz the last few years, and I would say it has a lot of parallels to crowdfunding in that, and some would even argue it is a form of crowdfunding, though I think because it's not always as project specific and it's more time specific that it's based around, but I do think they are different beasts. To a lot of folks, they are still kind of that new shiny toy. So it gets people excited, particularly some executives. They're saying, we have to do this, we have to do it now. So quickly I will note that, like crowdfunding, I'll caution that if you aren't doing the aforementioned blocking and tackling well, you shouldn't turn all your attention to giving days just yet. It involves more planning and resources, I think, in many cases than a crowdfunding program, but it's concentrated over a period of time. Whereas crowdfunding, if you're doing it right, you have constant projects that are coming up, and so you have a lot of resources and planning, but it's ongoing consistently. So I want to show you some good examples just so you can review, so you can visit and click around on what they're doing. And then, as I mentioned earlier, like if this is something you want to discuss in more detail, I'm happy to do so. And as I note that, I'm going to give a quick shout out to Lori that may be a good topic for us to cover on another one of these webinars in the future. So that said, as you can see here, Columbia is doing a great job with Giving Day. They've done this a couple times now, and they've had some really good success. And I had the good fortune of sitting down with some of the folks there recently and just going through all the details, and I'm excited about where it's going because they aren't just doing this, they're also making a strong point of sitting down and looking at what went well, what didn't go well, how can we improve this for next time, which, you know, a lot of programs forget that kind of debrief step after any new program or any program really, and it's more just, again, back to the spinning plates analogy that they're just trying to keep everything going and keep everything from falling, and so they don't necessarily get to take the time and look at a program like that. Here's, as you might know, this works great for community foundations, and really it got started in many ways, the Giving Days with communities, and it's now grown into other sectors. And the Minnesota one has really done very well. So if you get a chance, it's worth checking out. If you're with a health organization or the arts or, you know, some of the other like zoos or other museums that are out there, definitely would encourage you to, you know, try and jump on board with any local Giving Days, which at this point many communities have. Oh, and just, you know, just to give you a little tidbit about, you know, where I am and give you a little more perspective, I'm sitting in the middle of Pennsylvania, about 3 miles from Penn State, with snow falling outside my window. So all of you that I saw in California, etc., and even Hawaii that I saw on the registration list that don't know what a polar vortex may be, I'm very jealous right now. So maybe that's why I just chose to use the Minnesota example where I think it was minus 13 an hour or so ago. Anyway, moving on, what I was going to note was that even like a small state college, Pennsylvania, where I am, has a very successful Giving Day at this point. Another good example from the University of Florida, they've done this for a couple of years now, and what I like about what they've done is they've taken some old ingrained Florida traditions, which you'll see theirs is called Get Up and Give, which is actually a play on one of their popular sporting event chants, which is Get Up and Go. Come on, Gators, get up and go. And they've made it part of the homecoming tradition now, that part of homecoming is the Get Up and Give campaign, and they've done so successfully. And anyone that's ever tried to, you know, creating a tradition is almost counterintuitive. It's not something that you necessarily sit down and plan to do, but they've done a really nice job of integrating this fundraising campaign into the traditional homecoming events. And then a great one from DC, another community-based one, the Greater Washington Give to the Max Day. They've done a really nice job putting this together. And again, I would suggest that you go in and take a look at some of these items and see just, you know, some of the ways they tackled this. But again, if you've got the blocking and tackling covered. I want to take just a quick minute on stewardship as well. And the reason I do so is that when I work with organizations and institutions, I think this is one of the areas where, you know, I see annual giving maybe lack the most, in that it's really something that's often been kind of just an afterthought in annual giving, in terms of, well, we're going to send them the receipt, the tax receipt, and that works, and maybe we'll send out a thank you message around December, you know, 25th or 30th or 31st or whatever it may be, somewhere near the end of the year, and it's just, and that's about it. So what I'd like you to do is start to think about, how, what opportunities are there that you aren't taking advantage of to thank your donors, your volunteers, and to illustrate impact. It's actually, I think, the programs that are going to be really successful in 2014 and beyond are going to be those that do the research I mentioned earlier, and those that really, think about what it means to steward annual giving donors. A lot of times folks don't like to think about us as in competition with each other, but really you are competing for each prospect's philanthropic dollar. And those that do right in terms of their messaging and understanding how these folks want to be communicated with, those that understand, how to illustrate impact and how to say thanks properly are going to stand out. And they're going to be more likely to get continued support over the years. So that I touched on the receipt as that's one thing that, it's often viewed as something we have to do for accounting and for the IRS, and we send out this receipt. Make sure that that's actually a thank you. You can make a tax receipt look very, very nice and make it much more about the impact, and it happens to also be the tax receipt, not the other way around, where it's a tax receipt that happens to say thank you at some point. The email receipts, if you've got email contact for someone, getting back to them quickly and telling them, and showing them some of the impact can be wonderful. And then with regards to annual giving donors, social has really become a great way to steward donors and illustrate impact beyond, better than it is even for fundraising. A lot of times people that are on social channels are not necessarily, they're not as excited, obviously, to see an appeal. But when you can start to show some of the impact of what donors are doing, and you can start to say thank you to those that are supporting you, it can go a long way to help kind of teeing up the next ask that they may get via email or phone or mail, whatever it may be. And then one last thing that I try to trumpet, and not many programs will embrace, but I think would be great for more places to do, is once or twice a month, set aside lunch and maybe an hour afterwards for everyone, top to bottom, on your team to sit down and call donors and say thank you, and call and order some pizzas for afterwards, and leave voice messages as I mentioned earlier. But I'd also, this isn't just good for your donors and those that you're calling to say thanks, but it's great for your team. I think we all know people that, or programs that refer to, some folks are frontline fundraisers and some folks are the back line, the back room, whatever you want to call it. It's important to me that everyone in a program realizes they're a fundraiser and they're a part of every gift that comes in some way, shape, or form. So getting those that maybe aren't used to having that interaction, getting them the chance to call and say thank you and connect the dots to what their job does with saying thanks and to the gifts that are coming in, it also has value for your team as well. All right, and then some quick topics I'm going to go through before we dive into just the question section that we had talked about earlier in discussion. Major gift prospects, just in case. There are still programs to this day that don't include them in their annual giving appeals, be it because of some old policy that they were all excluded or whatever it may be. This is not the way to go. Don't get me wrong, there are certain prospects who maybe they just got a formal proposal placed in front of them and they should be excluded, but for the most part, these are folks that should be hearing from you, and hearing from you the right way. If you don't have a leadership annual giving program, which is still common to this day, that you've got the major gift program covered at the top, and then you've got the broad-based annual giving, but you don't have anything to tackle those folks that are falling in between, I'd encourage you to start one now. Make that part of 2014 for your program. Make that your own trend and direction to head in. If there's a place that I think is going to be the best forecaster of successful capital campaigns for the next decade or two, it's going to be programs that have invested well in leadership annual giving, because that's what's going to build the base of major gift donors for the future. It's also going to be what builds people from, kind of just their basic $100, $200 gifts every year into more substantial giving for your organization. Recurring giving comes by many different names, and it varies by nonprofit sector in terms of how well it's embraced. It's becoming more the norm for some programs, or for some nonprofits. A lot of museums are using this regularly. A lot of zoos are using it regularly. But then on the other end of the spectrum, education has been a little more shy to embrace this. And actually what I've seen there is that it has a lot more to do with accounting practices than anything else. It's that people are scared of, what does this mean for how we enter this into our database? What does it mean for this or that? Or is it compliant that we've got their information stored because we're going to run it every month? So try your best not to let those accounting practices get in the way of best practice for fundraising and maintaining these donors. I'm a huge fan of recognizing folks for consecutive giving. In many ways, I think, well, in almost every way, consecutive giving is what annual giving is actually all about, getting people to give and give and give again. If you haven't seen the numbers, I'm happy to discuss them in more detail with you, but basically there's lots of research out there in terms of, getting a new donor to renew is very difficult. Getting them into year 2 is also challenging, but once you get them to 3 or 4 years in a row of giving, you basically got them forever. Not you'll lose some people, but you've really got a committed annual donor then. So it's definitely a good place to recognize folks and to acknowledge folks beyond just saying, oh, you're in our bronze level because you gave between $100 and $249. It'd be better to be talking about how great it is that they've given 3 years in a row. Matching gifts are still free money, if you will, that are out there. I know that it's changing with programs. If you have the time and resources, one of my favorite programs to do is to go out and work with, there are a handful of vendors that know how to look at and update the matching gift databases and then compare it to your prospects and say, okay, you've got so-and-so working for, ExxonMobil, and we know they match at this level, and and here's the form they need to use. So you can take everyone that's already given to you and run it through that system and send them an appeal, basically, that says, just fill out this form and we get more money and you don't actually have to make the gift. So that's a great program to take on. I think I've hit illustrating impact on almost every slide, but if you can, I would encourage you to, every team meeting, ask someone to illustrate the impact donors are having. Really embrace this as far as of what you do. Now, for those that are quivering at the thought of being called on to do so, let me say that it's totally fine to give them a heads up that they're going to be the one that does it at this meeting, not just to surprise them. Oh, excuse me. So make sure that, you embrace illustrating impact as part of what you need to do. And then foreign constituents are an area that are often scary in the annual giving world, be it, no matter where you're sitting today, listen to this. The idea of getting beyond your borders and all the different nuances that includes in terms of how you approach people, how tax laws are different when it comes to charitable giving. Don't be afraid of it, but take time and give it very specific attention and resources because there's great potential there. And actually, there are many myths floating around out there about how various regions of the world are not charitable, but more and more we're seeing that there are definitely large charitable intentions across the globe at the upper level. So it's worth considering. That said, I think I'm ready to move into some of the questions. I do want to show you real quick that, as I mentioned earlier, there are these 2 slides that will have some of the links from earlier in the presentation for you to visit, and you'll get that with the slides as they come out later. Let me see if I can't get to some of the questions here. Oh, there it is. Okay, let's see here. I have heard about the volume. Yes. Okay, moving on. How do organizations using crowdfunding handle tax receipts and deductions? That's tricky from place to place, particularly if you're specifically talking about like the community foundation one, where it's organized by around the community, and then the gifts are going to different charitable organizations under that umbrella. Then it comes down to that organization to put them out there. If you're talking more like the Cornell example, then it's basically just coming from Cornell as any other tax receipt would with those folks. Let's see. Are these programs promoted through the organization's sites or through a service like Kickstarter? That's actually a little bit of a both when it comes to crowdfunding. For the most part, they're actually promoted through the organization's own sites, but are housed on a variety of different platforms like USeed and some of the others that are out there that are a platform for crowdfunding that are like Kickstarter, but that you don't necessarily see. It's kind of the man behind the curtain, if you will. Let's see. How do you reconcile donor fatigue, always sharing a new project, with encouraging giving every year, regardless of the projects? That's a really, really good point, and it's actually something I'm glad to note via crowdfunding. I like crowdfunding specifically for some of the audiences you haven't engaged and haven't gotten to give yet. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be used for donors as well, but I like if you've got somebody in that habit of giving and they're supporting a certain part of your organization already, I like to go through and keep them giving in that habit, in that pattern. Folks that are somewhat engaged from your research but haven't been giving, or particularly with younger donors, the crowdfunding can go very far to help match them with what they like, even though they haven't been supporting you yet. How a crowdfunding project impact on a well-established annual giving program? I think that's somewhat, does it siphon donors from annual giving? So that's somewhat of what I just tackled. Again, you need to, with everything, you need to think about how they integrate and how you pick your audience for each program. Expand on the resources that are involved in crowdfunding. There's all sorts of resources that go into this, because you've got to think about the planning, the development of materials, and the language you're going to use. You need to think about how you're going to then apply that all to whatever platform you're going to have it on. Then there's the daily management of the program, thanking donors, and bringing those that the questions that are always going to arise, how are we going to tackle those? Somebody needs to be paying attention to this and basically in charge of it for every day. Let's see. How can an organization do, or where is the best place to begin with constituent research? That's one where, not to be too self-promoting, but somewhere that I can sit down with you and help. It's something I've done a lot of, and I'm happy to sit down with anyone out there that wants to talk about constituent research and how to tackle it. There are lots of ways to do this, and some really good ones that can be cost-effective. And I have to say that I think the vast majority of folks that have taken the time to invest in constituent research see more than a healthy ROI when it comes to it, and see that money pay off and pay for itself by having the information they need going forward. Send some suggestions for direct mail companies. That's one I think is probably best to discuss, offline. Yeah, Grateful. Yeah, in terms of starting a Grateful patient, that's I'll reach out to those that asked that question and talk about those specifically. lots of questions about various software, etc. Those are things I can tackle in a blog post or an email to everyone after the fact. So I make sure I detail everything for you there. Do you recommend a stewardship event? That's one that is going to come down to resources, first of all, obviously. And events in general, I like to sit down and think about with planning of, what do we want to get from this event? What's the impact we're looking to have? And what's our reach going to be? So things like a stewardship event. If you have the budget to do it and you're going to tackle it, it's the kind of thing that you want to make sure isn't too much over the top, because then people start to question your use of resources, and that you get as much reach as possible through things like, using video to stream the event so that you can engage people on social at the same time, and really think about, how, oh man, it might be the drum here, but how you can illustrate impact throughout the event. Let's see. How long between each when in terms of setting the table of social media, email, and direct mail? That's also going to depend somewhat on resources, because if you're only able to afford, 2 direct mail pieces a year, that's going to vary how you're going to time those things to go together. Social media, I think, should be, if you're going to do what we were talking about earlier about setting the table, I think that can be within days and multiple times of the initial email approach. And then after you get that email out, one of my favorite actual tricks to do with email is that you send out that email, you wait 5 days, you see who hasn't opened it, and then you just change the subject line and use the exact same content for all of those that did not open the email, which saves you from having to recreate it. But if you're using any software that tracks these things, you know that if 70% of your folks didn't open it, you can send the same message just by changing the subject line may help you, again, as something else to test, which subject lines are working the best, may help you get in the door with those folks. Is there a way to create crowdfunding program around unrestricted funds? There are some efforts to do that, but even then, it's not entirely unrestricted. It's things like, helping students or helping one of the big overarching programs that an organization or institution may have. It can become a little tricky. One, that probably applies more to is like the Giving Day mentality, where you're working specifically on an event, a time, a date to highlight giving, and it's not specific about where the giving goes to. So I'd encourage you, for instance, to check out Columbia and Florida's programs for that one. Let's see. What about Giving Tuesday? Many of you are probably familiar with that after Black Friday and Cyber Monday, that there's now, of course, Giving Tuesday. I will use that to note. That's one of those things that I think a lot of people think about the Tuesday before Thanksgiving of, oh my gosh, we've got to do Giving Tuesday. And let me note, for those that, just in case those are out there aren't familiar with it, or it's Giving Tuesday is in the United States the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. It's become branded as a day to make your philanthropic gifts, where as historically we've had Black Friday as a big shopping day, and Cyber Monday was a big online shopping day back when people would go back to work and have a better internet connection than they had at home. And then, Giving Tuesday has now been branded as this day to support your favorite charities. So it's something to be, I think, that can be embraced, and it's not, per the question here, it's not Giving Tuesday versus your end of year appeal. It's figuring out if you can do both and embrace both. Let's see. Yes, there will be a recording. Oh, there's another comment on Giving Tuesday. some good examples of stewardship pieces, letters, videos, etc. I will put together a specific blog post just on some good examples of stewardship and get that up as soon as I can for everyone to see. I think we're actually winding down on time here, so and I don't want to keep anyone from getting on to their whatever they've got next on their calendar. What I will do is I will take any questions that we weren't able to get here and answer them all collectively, either probably not in one blog post so that nobody's head explodes from me jumping all over the place on different tangents, but in a series of collected blog posts that address them in themes like the crowdfunding, the giving days, stewardship, etc. And you'll see those come out here over the course of the next few weeks. If you think of anything else you want to discuss or other questions you have, please do not hesitate to get a hold of me. You can find me on the Martz and Lundy website or just Mathias, M-A-T-H-I-A-S, at martzandlundy.com. And I'm happy to discuss any of these things with you. Of course, having to promote social some, you can also find me very easily on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to talk to you there. Really appreciate everybody joining today and taking the time. If you have other questions, as I mentioned, don't hesitate to get a hold of me, and I look forward to talking to you all soon. Thank you very much, and take care.